This is the only church in the entire world in which the founding of the church was not through missionary priests, but rather through the intellectual pursuit of a higher being by layfolk. They're literally going door to door, meeting with people and really sharing the truth through conversation by the efforts of lay missionaries. 4,000 people were baptized. Hello, my name is Father Daniel Sa, and I would like to share with you about the rich history of the Church of Korea. Now, before I begin, I want to caveat that this is the only church in the entire world, the only country in which the founding of the church was not through missionary priests, but rather through the intellectual pursuit of a higher being by layfolk, by Korean scholars. And so the reason why I want to emphasize and share this with you today is because I think that there is a real need for us to recapture the sense of the intellectual pursuit of truth founded in the Catholic faith, especially in this generation, as in a sense, perhaps in this post-Christendom era, we are losing that sense of the truth. And so being inspired by the legacy of the past martyrs and the church's founding fathers, I hope to share with you an inspiration that we can continue to seek out and live that legacy today. So that said, I want to begin by saying the Church of Korea officially started in 1784. But in truth, the church actually began with roots being spread in the early 17th century. It was actually in 1603 that there were Western books, Western material like globes being shared with Koreans along the Silk Road. And so, Koreans would regularly go to China, particularly to Beijing, and they would, the scholars, and they would seek further Western influence during this time of the 17th century. And during that time, they were exposed to a lot of material, translated especially by Matteo Ricci and other Jesuit priests of the time, missionary priests. Now, real quick about the church in Beijing. So there were four main churches that were developed during the 17th century, and they were separated by kind of like a compass. So you had South Church, the North Church, the East and West. And keeping that in mind, there was a very important moment. It was in the year 1637, and it's called the Northern Disturbance. And there was a Korean prince. His name is Prince So-hyun, and he was captured and made captive in the Beijing area. So this is the son of the king. The king, his name was In-jo. And so Prince So-hyun was sent to the South Church, particularly to a priest. The priest's name is Father Johann Adam Schalvombel. And fortunately, the priest, being charitable and being a man of God, took great care of Prince So-hyun. And the prince was so taken aback by God, by the mercy, that this priest shared with him. And so he wanted to seek out where all of this was coming from. And so during that time, the priest was sharing with him a lot of the church's doctrine, but at the same time, he was also sharing with him the power of the divine image. And so there's actually a translation of Prince So-hyun's letter to Father Shaw. And in this, he shares, "The holy image possesses such majesty that hanging on the wall, it calms the mind and drives out even the slightest thought of evil. As for the globe and the books on mathematics, they are of such great value that they are indispensable to our age. And I don't know how lucky I am as to have them in my kingdom." So he was so excited to bring this back into his dynasty and to share these books with his court of scholars, because he realized and acknowledged that back home in Korea, all their text on mathematics was so antiquated and it couldn't keep up with the intellectual pursuit of the Western countries. And so he recognized that the mathematic books that had been produced by these Jesuit priests were a tremendous gift. But further than that, he was more intrigued by the man of Jesus. And he wanted to know who this God is because he really fell in love, recognizing that there is a truth here to this holy image that goes beyond what he and their country has pursued through their Confucian study. And that said, Father Shaw, when it came time for Prince So-hyun to return back home, he wanted to accompany him with this image, but he wouldn't receive it, fearing that the image and the faith of the Catholic cult, as he would say, with due respect, would be perhaps blasphemed. And so the priest instead sought to send him a missionary priest to accompany him. So Father Johann, he sent a request to the superior of China in charge of the Jesuit order. And the superior, unfortunately, realizing and having discerned that at the time, there only being 15 missionary priests, 15 Jesuit priests spread throughout the entire country, there wasn't enough men of the cloth to continue and even go to Korea. So it was an unfortunate loss for the Church of Beijing at the time, and they recognized it because when the prince returned home, he returned to his father, King Injo, and this was specifically in 1645, but he unfortunately died, and a lot of what he had wanted to share with the kingdom was lost. But along with that story, Catholicism was continuing to leak into the dynasties of Korea all throughout the 1600s and even to the early 1700s. And so there have been developments of particular Korean scholars who would rally around them other Korean scholars to really study a lot of these Western texts of Christian doctrine. And one of them, his name is Lee Soo-kwang, and in an essay, he mentions Catholicism for the first time, and that's what's recorded in our church's history. But after him, there is another really famous scholar. His name is Lee Ik, and he took this doctrine during the reign of King Cheongjo. That was like a really prominent time. This is like in the mid 1700s. And after that, Catholicism became really popular all throughout Korea, rather. So even in provinces of Hwanghae and Gangwon, many of those living in these areas would abandon the ancestral worship. We call that, like Chesa or Sebe. And so in the past, because those practices, cultural practices, were tied to other Korean religions, in particular, along with Neo-Confucianism and Buddhism, before that, there was shamanism. And shamanism is rather dark, and the church has discerned, this is demonic, so we cannot practice this. So they forbade the Koreans from doing ancestral worship. So that said, we fast forward to the late 1700s. So again, I mentioned that the church was founded in 1784. So it gets interesting because there was a group of scholars, and they would, on occasion, go into the deep forest where they're hidden and nobody can see them. And this is their time of silence and retreat to really do an intensive study. It's like when kids, when preparing to study for the SATs or like for their AP studies, they would go lock themselves in their rooms, right? This is like typical of like Koreans, right? And they just study their brains out until they can't think anymore. But these scholars, they would come together. There was a specific group who did a really intense study for 10 straight days in the deep woods. And I mean, I can name off the list to you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with these names, don't be overwhelmed, but I think it's important to honor them. Their names, the first three, they're brothers, so they sound very similar, is Chung Yak-yong, Chung Yak-jong, Chung Yak-chon. And then there's Lee Ka-hwan, Lee Pyuk, Lee Seung-hun, Hwang Sa-yong, Kwon Chol-sin, Kwon Il-sin, Lee Ki-yang, and Lee Yun-ha. And these guys are like the Avengers of the Korean church before its infancy. So these guys are the true heroes. And I will mention some of their names later in very particular stories. Today, I'm going to focus most especially on Lee Pyuk and Lee Seung-hun because these are basically the founding fathers. So that said, in 1784, Lee Pyuk was really trying to spread the faith. And, he was a highly intellectual man. His dad wanted him to be a successful archer, but he wanted to focus more on his studies. It's like, back then archery. So today it's like sports, right? Like becoming a professional sports, like basketball player or something. But I mean, take it with a grain of salt. But over back then, he wanted to hit the books. He was so intrigued by Western philosophy. And because he did so well with Confucianism, there was specifically in 1777, their version of like the SATs or even higher, like the MCATs. He would have a test with other scholars in front of King Chengzhou's court. And he did so well that he was actually like elevated rather quickly. And not only him, but there was his friend Yi Seung-hoon, who was also of a very high intellectual capacity, high IQ. And so one day, the court was going on a voyage or an envoy to China to pay their homage to the king of China, because Korea at the time as a dynasty was under the Chinese protection, so to speak. And they would have to make annual trips to pay their homage to the emperor. And the emperor would always send them back with so many gifts, to maintain that relationship. But during the time, Yi Seung-hoon, knowing he was going to go, and Lee Pyuk, knowing what was possible when Yi Seung-hoon leaves, really prepared him of what to look for and which priest to reach out to. And he said, when you get there, just take everything you can in, soak it up, learn all the doctrine about the Catholic Church, and really try to memorize it such that you can share that truth with us when you return. And if there's any like spiritual sacred images or artwork or anything material that we can get our hands on, get it, so that when you come back, we can really share this truth with everybody else. So Yi Seung-hoon goes to China, specifically to Beijing, and he gets in touch with the missionaries there, the priests. And there he is literally catechized, like is really intense nutshell catechesis. And as he listens to everything, it all rings true. When he went on that 10-day like silent immersion with the others and the other scholars in the forest, he already accepted that the Catholic truth, the teachings are real, and he accepted them. So when he went to China, he was so excited. And so when he gets there, this is specifically in the 1784 trip, he meets with a priest. His name is Louis de Gramont, and he's a French priest. And they do a quick test of how much catechesis he knew, and realizing that he had a certain foundation that they found adequate, they decided to baptize him on the spot. And so recognizing that this man would be the rock for the future of the Church of Korea, they named him Peter. And so he now becomes Peter Lee Seung-hoon, or Yi Seung-hoon. And so he returns to Seoul in the spring of 1784, and he brings with him again like all these Christian paraphernalia, like a large number of books, crucifixes, sacred images, and he shares these treasures with everyone around him. Now, I can share later about the details of what he did to evangelize, but in a nutshell, since he's come into Korea in 1784 until the next priest arrives, the first missionary priest from China, Father Chu Wenmo, 4,000 faithful were already baptized. Like you got to let that sink in for a second. By the efforts of lay missionaries that were on radical fire, their conviction, 4,000 people were baptized. This is an unbelievable legacy that we can be inspired by, because they were so
profoundly moved by God being a personable God who sees everyone as their father, in this relationship, familial relationship, having adopted us as his children, that set them off with the Holy Spirit. And so they were able to do incredible work. Really, not even, it's not like they're at the pulpit in a church and they're able to preach Christ crucified. They're literally going door to door, meeting with people in these little clusters or groups and really sharing the truth through conversation, right? Like they're doing the groundwork, and little by little, people share with each other what they learned. And, Lee Pyok, he did some amazing preaching, being a scholar, really having like the truths, like even what St. Thomas Aquinas taught of the 5 ways, right, of proving God's existence. Lee Pyok was able to change the minds of so many around him, beginning with his scholarly friends. And because of that, it really established a precedence. It kind of reminds me of like focused missionaries today and their efforts really beginning in the colleges, right? Like really focusing on seeking a deeper truth and a deeper love of God at that level. And because they are hungry for the truth, they're really evangelizing, but not by, going on some huge panel, but really by the personal encounter, friendship with their neighbors, with their friends, right? And that's literally like the church in Korea. The other thing is that the church in Korea is really like the Second Vatican Council's document called Lumen Gentium. And it is a document that highlights the mission of our primary vocation to holiness, of going out and proclaiming the good news. But the Church of Korea did this in its very founding. Like this is how it all started. And so it's ironic that this was highlighted by the church as being a real need and urgency since the Second Vatican Council, but that this was something that the Korean church was already living out during their time in the 1700s. So I hope that this is a good primer to get everyone excited for the future, to continue to absorb and learn what the Catholic Church has to offer. We see that the Catholic Church has always been rooted in seeking the teachings of Holy Mother Church, right? To be Roman Catholic. And so this is very exciting for us because today, I think there needs to be that ongoing intellectual pursuit, that ongoing seeking of what God has to offer us through the wisdom, through the knowledge that the church has to offer. And so I look forward to sharing with you more stories about personal saints, about important places of Catholic martyrdom sites, and everything else in between, all the persecution eras and all the little details of different unique stories. So stay tuned, make sure you subscribe, you hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.